Greetings and blessings, my brothers and sisters, children of Yahweh. Today, we'll be talking and answering some questions from a biblical perspective about sex. Yes, sex. Sexual immorality, fornication, and adultery. Before we begin though, let us point out a few things. Firstly, we'll be using the King James Version of the Bible. No footnotes, no endnotes, no outside influence, no human interpretation, just the viewpoint from the Bible alone. Secondly, in order to understand what is being presented, you have to clear your mind and forget about anything that you think you know about the topic. View the discussions with an open mind. Thirdly, we'll be presenting some biblical definitions. Yeah, and some scientific definitions as well. We encourage you to research and see if what we're presenting is true. Yeah, check your check and do your tests. As the Bible says, prove all things, but hold fast that which is true. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 21. Finally, after you double check, triple check, true check, and fact check the presentation, if you have biblical questions of your own, just subscribe and ask your question. We will make every effort to answer them in future discussions and presentations. Let us now start with our first definition. What is a harlot? So according to the Oxford Dictionary, a harlot is a prostitute. It also defines a prostitute as a whore or someone who sells sex for money. But listen up. Did you know that as far as the Bible is concerned, not every whore is a harlot? Confusing, right? Well, listen to this. Sometimes the Bible describes a whore without money. Let us explore this concept. Consider this. In Ezekiel 16 verses 1 to 14, we see that the Creator saw the children of Israel down and dirty. So what did he do? He took us up, cleaned us up, and made us beautiful. You know, in the same way a man will take a woman, spend some money on her, and make her beautiful. So you can see in verse 8, we were so beautiful, we were ready to be loved. And Yahweh played the role of a groom and made us his bride through a covenant. An agreement, just like a marriage agreement, so to speak. So what was this marriage agreement or covenant? The covenant was for our Father, our Creator, our Yahweh, to love and protect us as long as we worship Him only. But the minute we stop worshiping Him and start worshiping other false gods, then we are breaking the covenant. Yeah, we are breaking the covenant. We are breaking the marriage agreement. And now we are going whoring after false gods. In Deuteronomy 31 verses 16, we see that Yahweh told Moses that we will very likely go a whoring after the gods of the strangers of the land. In effect, we will become whores without money. You see what I'm saying? We became some dumb whores. We are whoring without getting money. How dumb is that? So now you see, we just define what a harlot is. And we show that the Bible uses whore sometimes to describe a harlot. But it also uses whore to describe us, the children of Israel, who broke the covenant and are now worshipping false gods. Let us now turn to the definition of fornication. In Ezekiel 16, we see that back in the day, people used to commit sexual immorality, which they call fornication. Sexual immorality or fornication is when you go to a place of worship, a church or a temple, for example, and worship false gods while having sex on the altar. The sexual act was part of the worship ceremony. Unbelievable, right? I know you don't believe me, but don't take my word for it. Look in Amos 2, verse 7 to 8. It clearly describes an act of fornication. Here, a man and his father have sex with the same woman, a temple prostitute. Google the term temple prostitute. Note in verse 8, it shows that they lay down on their clothes at the altar while having sex and worshiping their false god. Check it out. Look at it. Don't take my word for it. At this time, however, I think I should point out that a harlot is sometimes different from a temple prostitute. Here is the difference. A harlot sells sex for money. It is her profession, and some of them fall in the profession as a means of survival. For them it's work. It's survival. It's not for worship. A good example is seen in Genesis 38, verse 12 to 16. When Judah's wife died, he wanted some sex. So he went into what he thought was a harlot. Not a temple prostitute, a harlot. However, we all know that the woman he slept with was Tamar. And Tamar is the great, many times great grandmother of our Savior, Yahushua, who some of you incorrectly call Jesus. So expanding on the difference between a harlot and a temple prostitute. The harlot have sex with you for money. She does it for money. The temple prostitute, however, do the act as part of the worship ceremony ritual. Yeah, worshiping false god. Now the purpose of the ritual or the sexual act varies from the desire to bear children, where they worship the god of fertility, to a farmer going into a temple prostitute to get some rain for his crops. Yeah, and everything else you can think of in between. They go to the temple prostitute for a lot of different things, but the act is part of the worship ceremony ritual. So according to society back then, you going to these churches and having sex on the altar, that don't make you a harlot. That make you a church goer going to worship. Similarly today, a lot of these church people, they go to church and they're worshiping false gods, and yet still they're pushing up their nose at other people and saying these people are sinners. In the process of feeding their ugly, dirty desires, they have sex at the altar and worship false gods such as Baal, Asherah, and even Diana. In some cases, they also kill their children and sometimes burn them as sacrifice. In 2 Kings 23, verse 10 to 15, we see that King Josiah, a righteous man, he destroyed a lot of these temples. For example, he destroyed the temples that was dedicated to Molech, the false god, where they sacrificed their children by burning. You see that in verse 10. He also destroyed the temple dedicated to the sun god. As you see in verse 11. He also, in verse 13, you see that he destroyed the altars for other false gods such as Astoret, Chemosh, and other false gods. Additionally, in Acts 19, verse 27 to 35, we see that in the land of the Ephesians, and most of the world at the time actually, were worshipping the false god Diana in her temple. These dirty acts of fornication brings to mind Michael Jackson's song, Dirty Diana. Yeah, listen to the song. Those lyrics perfectly match this situation. Further down in Ezekiel 16, where the Almighty is rebuking the children of Israel, we see that he uses the term harlot and whore interchangeably. After all, some harlots were also fornicators. Ezekiel 16, verse 20 to 21 talks about sacrificing children through fire, while verse 24 to 26 talks about the altars that were built and the sexual acts that were done on these altars. In a slight twist though, in verse 31 to 34, it shows that while they as a society was looking down on harlots that were taking money for sex, these fornicators were having sex at the altar for free, getting no reward. And of course, the rebuke continues from verse 36 to the end of the chapter. So you still want more proof that fornication is having sex at the altar while worshiping false god? Alright, let me give you more proof. Look in Hosea 4 verse 13 to 19. Again, it's talking about sacrificing on altars. Verse 17 mentions being joined to idols. That is fornication. It talks about whoredom and adultery, the breaking of the covenant, the breaking of the marriage agreement. But, brothers and sisters, everything is spelled out in Ezekiel 16. The definition of fornication is spelled out in Ezekiel 16. I mean, the word is mentioned specifically in verses 26 and verse 29. Again, don't take my word for it. Read it yourself. So, sexual immorality or fornication is when you go to a place of worship, a church or a temple, for example, and worship false gods while having sex on the altar. The sexual act is part of the worship ceremony. It is idolatry. And because it is idolatry, it means we broke the covenant, the marriage agreement, we broke it. And because we broke it, we commit adultery. And that makes us whores. So, if fornication is having sex on the altar while worshipping false gods, then what is having sex before marriage? And is it wrong to have sex before marriage? Oh boy, I love this part. And I love those two questions. So here's the deal. According to Deuteronomy 22, verse 28 to 29, there is nothing wrong with sex before marriage. Absolutely nothing. Deuteronomy 22, verse 28 to 29 says if a man have sex with a woman that is not married, note, not married. If you have sex with a woman that is not married, just simply pay her for the dowry and get married to the woman. If you have sex with her, just marry her. Nothing is wrong with that. Again, don't take my word for it. Read Deuteronomy 22, verse 28 to 29. Clearly, fornication is not having sex before marriage. Some dumbass pastors have been spreading wrong information for a long time. They need to stop spreading wrong information. Fornication is having sex in church while worshiping false gods, not having sex before marriage. Now, let us look at adultery. What is adultery? We already mentioned that our Creator made a covenant, a marriage agreement with us. And when we broke the agreement, we committed adultery. However, what about marriage agreements between mortal men and mortal women? Well, let us look at some marriages between mortal men and mortal women in the Bible. In Genesis 16 verse 3, Sarah, Abraham's wife, gave her maid Hagar to Abraham to marry. Similarly, in Genesis 30 verse 4, Rachel, Israel's wife, gave her maid Bilhah to marry Israel. Additionally, in 1 Kings 11 verse 3, we see that King Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Abraham, Israel, and Solomon, among others, were all chosen men by the Father, and they were allowed to have more than one wife. On the other hand, however, no woman in the Bible was allowed to have more than one husband. The reason for this is seen in Genesis 3 verse 16. Here the woman is being punished for disobeying the Creator, and he, the Creator, set the woman's husband to rule over her. And because of this, if a married woman has sex with any man other than her husband, then she has broken the marriage agreement and have committed adultery. This is similar to us, the children of Israel, breaking our covenant with our Creator, who is the groom, thereby committing adultery. Unlike the married woman, however, a married man can have sex with an unmarried woman who is not his wife, as long as he intends to marry her. In this case, Deuteronomy 22 verse 28 to 29 would apply, and the woman will become betrothed to the man until marriage. Hence, a man can have more than one wife. So, using the principles of Deuteronomy 22 verse 28 to 29, if a married man have sex with an unmarried woman who is betrothed to him, he is not committing adultery. Some dumbass pastors will have you believe that he's committing adultery. He's not. This is not adultery, neither is it fornication. Clearly, adultery is when a man, married or not, have sex with another man's wife. Both the man and the woman have committed adultery. Now that fornication and adultery is defined, let us look at Matthew 19 verse 9. Now Matthew 19 verse 9 is a very misunderstood part of the Bible. So let's examine it and see how our Savior, Yahushua, made a clear distinction between fornication and adultery. So Matthew 19 verse 9 states that if any man divorce his wife except for fornication, which is worshiping false god, if he divorce his wife and marry another woman, he is committing adultery. Why? Because he breaks the marriage covenant for no good reason. Also, if another man marry that woman that he divorced, then that man is committing adultery because she is still married to her original husband. Note that Matthew 19 verse 9 is a discussion surrounding the context of divorce. Yahushua was referencing to divorce. He was not talking about a man having more than one wife. He's talking about if a man divorce his wife. Again, divorce. So let us break down Matthew 19 verse 9 with some examples. Example number 1. If your wife crave money and put money before everything, including the Creator, then run. And run fast. Run faster than Usain Bolt. This is fornication. She's worshiping money, a false god. Get a divorce and don't look back. Example number 2. If you sleep with another man's wife, your wife should leave your ass. This is adultery. You have broken the marriage covenant. However, if the other woman is unmarried, you should marry her. Good luck to you though trying to have more than one wife if you live in some countries. Example number 3. If your wife finds a new lover, what the Jamaicans call Joe Grind. If your wife finds a younger man that is not married and have sex with him, brother, leave her ass. This is adultery. Even though the young man is not married, it is still adultery. Yes, my brothers and sisters, this concludes our presentation. Thank you for your time. Our next presentation, Module 2, will focus on the Sabbath. We look forward to your company. Remember, if you have biblical questions of your own, just subscribe and ask your questions. We will make every effort to answer them in future discussions and presentations. Thanks again.